They say crime doesn't pay. But of course it does, otherwise people wouldn't do it. Crime can pay, and it can pay a lot. More money than even a person could actually spend in a lifetime. It just so happens that crime often also leads to fines, prison, and/or death. So it's a risky way to make a living. The UN reports that the amount of dirty money that's made through criminal enterprises is between $800 billion and $2 trillion annually. Today, we're going to look at some of the crime world's biggest earners from the near past to the present day. The numbers given are of course estimates, because criminals are not usually in the habit of filing tax returns. But we feel pretty confident in the numbers nonetheless. We'll start with the poorest of these filthy rich criminals and finish with the king of the underworld. Number 12. Se Chi Lop. This Chinese-Canadian man is still in business as we speak. He's sometimes called Asia's El Chapo and is said to be the head of a multinational crime syndicate that goes by the name of Samgor, or the Company. This company controls about 40% of the methamphetamine market in the Asia-Pacific region, but it involves many drug kingpins, from those who own super labs in Myanmar to gangsters who ensure the product travels to its destinations. They traffic other illegal substances too. Many gangs are involved, including Hong Kong triad gangs and Australian outlaws, such as the Comanchero Motorcycle Club. The Japanese Yakuza also have some fingers in this big fat illegal pie. How do we know Se Chi Lop sits in the big seat? Well, that's what cops think. He's said to run this network very professionally. Of course, they deal in violence, but the money is so good the people in the network prefer to run things without trying to draw too much attention to themselves. So how much does the boss have? That's anyone's guess, but word on the street is Samgor is raking in around $17 billion a year. We guess Mr. Se Chi Lop to be a billionaire by now. He's got private jets and doesn't go anywhere without his team of bodyguards, all of them trained in martial arts. He sounds like one of those villains from a James Bond movie, and get this, in just one night in a Macau casino, he lost $66 million. Crime is paying for him, but the cops say it's only a matter of time until he's caught. Number 11. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman. From Asia's El Chapo to the real El Chapo. This former head of the Mexican Sinaloa cartel was at one point the 10th richest man in Mexico and worth $1 billion. He started off as a kid growing marijuana, and then in his later years he became a drug trafficker who moved all kinds of substances. No doubt a lot of drug users in the United States and Europe back in the day had some of his product. He was so big he was compared to some of the world's biggest drug kingpins, and that's why an $8.8 million reward was offered for the information that would lead to his arrest after he escaped from prison the first time. Yeah, the first time. Because as many of you will know, El Chapo got out a second time with the use of tunnels. He's now locked up in the US. Did the drugs stop flooding the US and Europe after that? No, not at all. The drug trade is still flourishing and bodies are still piling up. You can almost hear the criminals in Mexico shouting, "The king is dead! Long live the king!" Someone somewhere has taken over El Chapo's business and is likely deserving to be on this list. Unfortunately, when you take out a kingpin, the princes tend to fight for his place. Number 10. Susumu Ishii. So you're now probably thinking, who? Mr. Ishii might be unknown to you, and you haven't seen the movie about him, but it's thought his net worth was about $1.5 billion. Much of that money was made in crime, since this man was the godfather of the Japanese Inagawa-kai Yakuza gang. We say much of that money because the Yakuza gangs are known for making big bucks in legal businesses as well as in the underworld. He once said this about criminality: "We cannot succeed in the Yakuza world unless we're active and aggressive until our early 40s. After that, we have to adapt our lives to ordinary society. We cannot always be so forceful." One of his legitimate businesses was a golf course he built, and a very luxurious one at that. Membership was $100,000 to $200,000, and he apparently had many members. In fact, he made millions from his investments, and at one point, he was called the world's richest gangster. People used to say everything that he touched turned to gold. He retired as a godfather, and when he died in 1991, over 6,000 people showed up at his funeral. And here's a fact for you: a Mr. Prescott Bush was on this man's payroll at one point. That's the older brother of former President George Bush. The U.S. Securities and Exchange Commission said it was all legal business, but helping out formidable Japanese gangsters wasn't a good look for Prescott. A Japanese Yakuza expert told the LA Times being connected to the president's family increases the gang's prestige. Number 9. Griselda Blanco. From the Godfather to a woman known as the Godmother, well, when she was alive. She died in 2012. Back in the 80s and 90s, she helped flood the streets of the USA with the drug called cocaine. Sometimes called the Black Widow, she went from petty crime in Colombia city of Medellin to becoming the godmother. She played a part in a lot of vice that went down in the city of Miami, and she had a violent way of doing business and living life. Hence, she got the name the Black Widow. When she was in court, it was revealed that she had killed 3 of her husbands, as well as scores of innocent people she just didn't like. After a confrontation in a nightclub with someone she didn't like, this is what the Guardian newspaper wrote. After a blazing gun battle, he and 6 bodyguards lay dead. Blanco, who suffered only a minor gunshot wound to the stomach, recovered and soon afterwards moved to Miami, where her body count and reputation for ruthlessness continued to climb. For her work, she ended up doing a lot of prison time in the USA, and then in 2012 she was shot down after buying some meat at a butcher's in Medellin. It's thought that her net worth has been as high as $2 billion. Number 8. Carlos Leder. The U.S. Department of Justice said this guy was worth about $2.7 billion, which isn't bad considering the fact that he started out in business as a man who dealt in stolen cars in the USA. You might have seen his story depicted in the Johnny Depp movie called Blow. That was about a cocaine smuggler named George Young. He hooked up with Leder, and that's how he met the Medellin cartel and got into cocaine smuggling. The two trafficked hundreds of kilos of Pablo Escobar's white powder into the USA and got incredibly rich doing it. Leder is now 70 years old and lives in a U.S. prison, quite different from the time he pretty much turned an island in the Bahamas into his very own luxury fortress. Number 7. Leona Helmsley. It's about time we had a white-collar criminal on the list, and this woman was known as the Queen of Mean. She was a businesswoman, but it didn't seem that she liked much paying her taxes. In fact, she once said, "We don't pay taxes, only the little people pay taxes." She also didn't pay contractors at times when she spent millions renovating one of her many properties. She eventually got 16 years for tax evasion, but only ended up serving 19 months. After her husband died, he left his empire to her, and that included properties of great value such as the Empire State Building. So if she had sold everything, she would have been worth more billions. After she died in 2007, a lonely woman, she left $12 million to a dog named Trouble. We're not sure what the dog did with the cash. Her estate is said to be worth $4 billion. Number 6. Khun Sa. If you travel in northern Thailand to a small town called Thoed Thai on the Myanmar border, you'll find a museum dedicated to a man named Khun Sa. That translates as Prince Prosperous, and you might say this prince ran things on the frontiers of the Wild East. Outside that museum, there's a grand statue of him on a horse, and if you chat with locals, you hear a lot of nice things about him. That's because his drug empire was worth about $5 billion and funded schools, hospitals, and an army fighting for the liberation of the Shan state in Myanmar. Dubbed the Opium King, he worked out of what's called the Golden Triangle, an area that intersects Thailand, Myanmar, and Laos. This opium was turned into heroin, and if you did that stuff in the 1970s to the 1990s, there's a good chance it came from him. He controlled about half of the world's heroin trade. The US detested him, and he was enemy number 1. But how do you arrest a man who commands a large army and can hide out in the hills on the Thai-Burmese border? Even the locals would protect him, so he wasn't an easy man to arrest, not even with a $2 million bounty on his head. That's because he helped the people. In fact, he told the United Nations that he would eradicate his opium crops, but he wanted the UN to invest money in foreign aid. He also asked for money so the people could substitute their crops for other crops, as well as some cash for healthcare and education. Even today, this area is very poverty-stricken. The US said, "No, we don't do deals with drug dealers, that's blackmail." Khun Sa later retired, and while many attempts were made to arrest him, he was never caught. He died an old man. It's thought his net worth was about $5 billion at one point. They still honor him in Thoed Thai, and he's one of the reasons a lot of people have running water and electricity. They didn't see the mini junkies in the streets of London and New York, so he's all good to them. Number 5. Viktor Bout. This Russian man has been called the Merchant of Death, and that's because he's one of the most notorious arms smugglers the world has ever known. That enterprise might have earned him the region of $6 billion. He made headlines when he was arrested in Thailand in 2008. He's since been extradited to the USA and is currently imprisoned there. He has quite the resume. Both is very intelligent, that's for sure. He speaks many languages fluently, including Russian, English, Portuguese, French, Arabic, and Persian. He started out in the Soviet Armed Forces and later built an air freight business. This line of work turned into arms trafficking, and he worked with a lot of countries and armed factions fighting inside countries. Since he's armed so many people, the US Department of Justice sees him as a terrorist, although Boat doesn't feel that way. He believes he's being held as a political prisoner. He once said that gun shop owners in the USA do exactly the same job he did. Number 4. Dawood Ibrahim. If you somehow managed to give some information that led to the arrest of this guy, you yourself would get rich because the reward is 25 million. He might be worth around 7 billion. What does Dawood do? We use the present tense because he's still in business and living life as a free man. He is the head of the D Company, which is an organized crime outfit in Mumbai, India, but spans the world. The FBI has him on the list of the world's 10 most wanted fugitives, and he's accused of, well, you name it: murder, extortion, drug trafficking, assassinations, and terrorism. Where he is up for speculation. He might be in Pakistan, he might not. He's an invisible man, but behind the scenes he has fingers in a lot of crime pies in South Asia. Number 3. Simeon Mogilevich. This man is in what's sometimes called the Russian Mafia, but he's the boss of bosses, the one and only, and he's a free man in Moscow. The FBI doesn't much like the fact and has called him the most dangerous mobster in the entire world. If we listed all the things he's been accused of in this video, it would be an hour long. But suffice it to say, he is alleged to have committed all the worst kinds of crimes, but on an international scale. What does he get for his enterprises? It's thought about $10 billion. Number 2. Armando Carrillo Fuentes. Here's the Mexican drug lord you might not have heard of, but you may have heard how he died. That's because he was undergoing surgery to change the way he looked when it happened. The US and Mexico were after this man, a guy behind much of the drug trafficking industry that stretched out around the world. That's why he needed to change his face. The surgeons, by the way, were tortured and killed for their part in his death. Carrillo was about as big as you can get, and before there was the likes of El Chapo, there was him. It's thought he might have made $25 billion in total for moving that devil's dandruff from Colombia through Mexico and into the USA. Number 1. Pablo Escobar. There's only one king of cocaine, and he is named Pablo Escobar. He's been dead a long time, but still runs things on Netflix. We expect many of you feel you know him very well because he's the drug trafficker we can't stop making movies and TV shows about. Escobar founded the notorious Medellin cartel in the 70s and 80s, and he moved tons of cocaine into the United States. That earned him in the region of $30 billion, making him one of the richest people in the world. He's responsible for countless deaths, the ruin of families and entire neighborhoods, and the reason some people never seem to be able to quit talking about themselves at parties while intermittently sneaking off to the restroom. His empire wasn't exactly a smooth business to run, and through the competition and avoiding the law, the number of lives lost could equal that of a war. While his line of work led to a lot of blood spilled, like Kunsa, he won some people over because he put some of his wealth into poor communities. He got involved in petty crime as a kid, but in his 20s he was making millions. He was about 26 years old when he started trafficking large amounts of cocaine into the USA. When he was shipping the largest quantities, as much as 51,000 pounds could go in one shipment. The cartels during its heyday was making about $70 million a day. They even spent $1,000 a week on rubber bands that they used to wrap around the bundles of cash. Escobar was killed by police when he was 44. Some criminals in Colombia are still raking in the cash. The US State Department said in 2017 that Colombia still remains a major player, and that in that year, use and availability of the stuff in the US was on the rise again after a fall. We've got an even better idea than you taking up a life of crime, and that's clicking on this great video right here, or making an even smarter decision and clicking on this other amazing video over here.